Hi, I'm Missy Weiss, and this is my presentation on critical race theory. So, as far as my own racial identity, I've always had a hard time when I was growing up of what I identified with. I am a light-skinned Mexican, and I don't speak Spanish. So, over the years, I have just kind of disassociated with my racial identity, and I just identified myself as a second generation American. From on my father's side, I was second generation American. So I have always identified as like all American. And I have to say that I first became aware of my racial self in high school when I had some Mexican friends who would ask me questions about, I had a Mexican last name, but I didn't speak Spanish, and I didn't really look like them, and we didn't practice the same traditions as them as far as like religion and holidays and stuff. So there was a separation in that, and they referred to me as a whitewashed Mexican. So I just kind of settled into that, and that is what I can remember as being my racial identity. A time in my life that I have witnessed institutional racism, I have to say, I have witnessed it several times throughout my life, but the thing that was most profound, or what came up for me most profoundly when getting ready to do this assignment, was my thoughts of when I volunteered at a homeless shelter over on Skid Row in Los Angeles, California. And after we did the volunteer work, the facilitator offered to take my group on a tour of Skid Row. So we walked like a square city block of the Skid Row neighborhood and actual Skid Row. And sadly, I noticed that it was mostly black people that were out there. And for every maybe 25, there was maybe one white person or one Mexican person. So the streets were covered with men, women, children, all ages, young, old, people in wheelchairs, people on crutches, able-bodied. It was just striking, and I was shocked. I had heard stories of Skid Row, but I had never experienced anything like that. And for me, the racial disparity of it was like frightening, and I had to really take a look at it, as I'm looking at these people in their tents and their makeshift coverings. They have tarps up, and their whole house, or their makeshift houses are on the side of the curb. And I'd have to say, it was my early 30s, so I was early adulthood, and the inequality, not only between the races, but in just socioeconomic classes, and in the different classes, whether they're drug addiction, mentally ill, handicapped, disabled, young, old, like I mentioned before. And I asked myself, while I was out there, and I think I even asked the guy who was leading our tour, would this be an issue if these people were white? Would this be happening? Like, would the city have stepped in? Would the government have stepped in? The county, the city, the state? Would they let that many white people be on the streets living that way? And it was like a really hard takeaway to ask myself that question and know the answer is probably no, they would not. They would not let a whole, for lack of better words, it's like a whole nother city. Skid Row is like a city of its own. So let a whole nother city develop of people who are struggling and homeless and drug addicted and mentally ill. So according to the critical race theory in social work education, the framework for addressing racial disparities, one action that I could take to challenge the power structures would be, what I identified was the intersectionality of identities, by addressing the other areas of oppression as well as the racial disparity. So there's the oppression of people living on Skid Row, the poor, the mentally ill, the disabled, the elderly, the children. There was just so many different intersections that can be addressed. And it isn't just a race thing, although it very much so was racial disparity. And it's still live and well over there today. It's still like a city of its own, of people struggling and living on that city block. So that concludes my assignment for the critical race theory presentation, and I really hope I didn't say too much. Thank you for watching.